They say curiosity killed the cat, but in my line of work, curiosity is the fuel that keeps me going. My name is Aaron Blake, and I've spent the better part of my life chasing whispers in the dark. By day, I'm a journalist, specializing in feature pieces on forgotten histories. By night, I'm something else entirely, an explorer of the uncharted, the taboo, the haunted. If there's a place with a story buried beneath cobwebs and dirt, I'll be the one to find it. It started innocuously enough, a fascination with abandoned buildings when I was younger, sneaking into old warehouses with friends, flashlight in hand, trying to spook each other with fake ghost stories. But as I grew older, the stories became real. The crumbling walls of those places seemed to breathe, whispering secrets only the brave or foolish would dare to uncover. I didn't seek out haunted places at first. They found me. It began with a photo assignment in my early days at the Beacon Chronicle. The editor handed me a note. Old Courthouse, Maple Hill. Document condition for preservation grant. Standard fare. But what I found there, the chill in the air that seemed to deepen as I walked through its corridors, the fleeting shadow that I could never quite place, was anything but ordinary. When I wrote about the experience, focusing on the courthouse's tragic history of wrongful executions, the piece went viral. Readers craved more, and soon enough, I was carving a niche in the macabre. Over the years, my work took me to places where fear thrived. An abandoned hospital in Colorado, a dilapidated prison in Louisiana, even a long-forgotten island off the coast of Maine. Each place had its unique terror, a story waiting to be unearthed. Some tales stayed with me longer than others. Some refused to leave me altogether. Tonight, as I pack my gear for my latest expedition, I can't shake the weight of what lies ahead. I'm not just chasing ghosts anymore. I'm chasing the unknown. This journey begins in the woods of Vermont, where a mansion long forgotten waits at the end of an overgrown trail. Locals call it Hollow Manor, though it has other names. The Vanishing House, the Screaming Place. Whispers of its haunting have been passed down for generations. A family of 5 moved in one summer in the late 1800s, and by winter they were all dead. No explanation, no suspects, just a legacy of screams that reportedly echo through the trees on certain moonless nights. I load my backpack with essentials: a flashlight, spare batteries, a notepad, and my recorder. There's also a small amulet my grandmother gave me years ago, one she swore would protect me from evil spirits. I've never been superstitious, but after my time at the old courthouse, I keep it close, just in case. The drive to Hollow Manor takes longer than expected. Vermont's winding roads stretch endlessly, bordered by dense, skeletal trees that shiver in the wind. As night falls, my headlights cut through a mist that seems to thicken with every passing mile. By the time I reach the dirt trail leading to the mansion, it's past midnight, and the forest is deathly silent. I park my car at the trailhead, hesitant to leave its relative safety. The woods loom around me, tall and imposing, their shadows reaching like fingers across the ground. I glance back at my car, the soft hum of its engine comforting. But then I remember, I've come too far to turn back. The path to the mansion is treacherous, overgrown with thorny vines and slick with mud. My boots squelch with every step, and more than once, I feel the weight of eyes on me. Perhaps it's just the forest playing tricks, but I can't shake the sensation. My flashlight casts a narrow beam ahead, illuminating the gnarled roots and twisted branches. It feels as if the forest itself is trying to stop me. After what feels like an eternity, the mansion comes into view. Hollow Manor stands in a small clearing, its silhouette jagged against the starless sky. Its once grand facade is now a patchwork of rotted wood and peeling paint. The windows are black voids, and the front door hangs slightly ajar, as if inviting me in or daring me to enter. I take a deep breath, steadying my nerves. The air here feels wrong, heavy with an unspoken warning. But I press on, driven by the promise of a story untold. As I step inside, the floor creaks beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the cavernous interior. The smell of decay is overpowering, a mix of damp wood and something else, something metallic. My flashlight sweeps across the foyer, revealing a grand staircase shrouded in dust and cobwebs. Portraits line the walls, their faces faded and scratched, as though someone had tried to erase them from memory. I pull out my recorder and hit the button. Hollow Manor, I say, my voice trembling slightly. The house where a family vanished without a trace. Initial observations. The structure is in severe disrepair, but there's an atmosphere here, a sense of being watched. The moment the words leave my lips, a faint sound comes from upstairs. A soft creak, like a footstep. I freeze, my pulse quickening. It's probably just the house settling, I tell myself. Old wood groans under the slightest pressure. But deep down, I know better. Something or someone is here. The creak upstairs sets my teeth on edge. For a moment, I'm paralyzed, staring up at the black void of the staircase. The beam of my flashlight wavers as my hands shake. But I remind myself why I'm here. No one's lived in this house for over a century, or so the stories go. The logical explanation is an animal. A raccoon or a squirrel nesting in the rafters. Let's find out. I mutter under my breath, my voice a faint echo in the stillness. The first step on the staircase groans loudly beneath my boot, almost like a warning. The sound reverberates through the vast space, making the silence that follows feel even heavier. I make my way up cautiously, the flashlight cutting through the layers of dust and cobwebs that shroud the banister. The air is colder here, biting at my skin despite the jacket I'm wearing. Halfway up, my light catches movement at the top of the stairs. A flicker, like something darting out of sight. My heart lurches, but when I reach the landing, there's nothing there. Just the long, dim corridor ahead, lined with closed doors. The hallway smells of mildew and rot, the walls blotched with moisture stains. The doors are warped and cracked, some barely hanging on their hinges. I pick one at random and push it open, revealing a small bedroom. The room looks untouched, frozen in time. A bed with a moth-eaten quilt sits against one wall, its wooden frame sagging. A wardrobe stands in the corner, its door slightly ajar, revealing empty hangers swaying gently on a rusted rod. A single porcelain doll sits on a rocking chair by the window, its painted eyes staring directly at me. I hate dolls. Ignoring the uneasy feeling prickling at the back of my neck, I step inside and scan the room. On the bedside table is an oil lamp, its glass chimney cracked but intact. Beside it, a small leather-bound journal catches my eye. I reach for it, wiping away a layer of grime to reveal the initials H embossed on the cover. I open it carefully, the brittle pages threatening to crumble under my fingers. The handwriting is elegant but hurried, the ink faded in places. The first entry is dated July 3, 1887. We moved into the manor today. Father says it's a fresh start for all of us. A chance to leave the troubles of the city behind. The house is grand, though in need of repairs. Mother seems uneasy, but she hides it well. We are to make the best of it. The entry is innocent enough, but something about the tone feels off. I flip to another page, this one dated a month later. The noises began last night. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but no, it came from within the house. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing in the halls. Father says I'm imagining things, but I know what I heard. Something is here. I close the journal, a chill crawling down my spine. The family's descent into madness, or worse, is recorded here, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm following in their footsteps. A soft thud draws my attention back to the hallway. It's faint but distinct, like the sound of a door closing. I step out of the bedroom, scanning the corridor with my flashlight. Nothing looks out of place, but the oppressive stillness feels heavier now, as if the house is aware of my presence. Hello, I call out, my voice barely louder than a whisper. The only reply is the creak of the floorboards beneath me. I continue down the hall, my flashlight catching glimpses of faded wallpaper and more empty rooms. Near the end of the corridor, one door stands slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. Unlike the others, this door looks newer, the wood polished and free of rot. I push it open cautiously, revealing what appears to be an attic staircase leading upward. A cold draft flows down the steps, carrying with it the faint scent of something foul, something dead. Against my better judgment, I ascend the stairs. The attic is vast and cluttered, filled with forgotten relics of the past. Old trunks, broken furniture, and stacks of yellowed newspapers are scattered haphazardly. The beam of my flashlight lands on a large mirror propped against the far wall, its surface warped and fogged with grime. Something about its placement feels deliberate, like it's been left there for a reason. I step closer, and as I do, the temperature drops sharply. My breath fogs in the air, and a prickling sensation spreads across my skin. In the mirror, my reflection wavers, distorted by the uneven glass. But then I see it, movement behind me. I spin around, the flashlight jerking wildly, but there's nothing there. Only shadows. My heartbeat pounds in my ears as I turn back to the mirror. This time, the reflection is wrong. My reflection is wrong. The figure in the glass isn't moving with me. It's standing still, staring back at me with hollow eyes that gleam faintly in the darkness. Its mouth moves, forming words I can't hear, but its intent is clear. It wants me to listen. Suddenly, the journal in my hand feels heavier, almost burning against my skin. I drop it instinctively, and as it hits the floor, a low whisper fills the attic. A single word repeated over and over. Leave, leave, leave. I don't need to be told twice. I stumble back down the attic stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. The journal lies forgotten on the floor above, but I don't care. All I can think about is getting out of this house. The whispers follow me as I descend the grand staircase, growing louder, more insistent. By the time I reach the front door, they've become a cacophony, a chorus of voices screaming in unison. I wrench the door open and stagger into the night, the cold air biting at my face. The forest is still and silent, but the house looms behind me, dark and malevolent. As I reach my car and fumble with the keys, I make the mistake of looking back. In one of the upper windows, a pale face stares out at me, watching as I drive away. I thought I'd be relieved to leave Hollow Manor behind, but the sense of unease followed me like a shadow. Sleep was fleeting that night, haunted by vivid dreams of the attic and the figure in the mirror. The whispers echoed in my mind, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face staring back at me. But this is the life I chose, chasing stories that most people would rather leave buried. The next location on my list was even more infamous: Blackwood Asylum. Nestled in the rural hills of Pennsylvania, Blackwood Asylum was built in the late 1800s as a sanctuary for those deemed unfit for society. What began as a place of care quickly devolved into a chamber of horrors. Tales of mistreatment, brutal experiments, and unexplained deaths surfaced over the years, culminating in its closure in 1952. Since then, it had been left to rot, a hulking ruin overrun by nature and superstition. Blackwood had a reputation that extended far beyond local ghost stories. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and historians had all tried to uncover its secrets. Some claimed to have heard screams echoing through its halls. Others swore they saw figures in the windows despite the building being empty for decades. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I couldn't resist the pull of its dark history. The drive to Blackwood was long and uneventful, the landscape shifting from bustling highways to lonely country roads. By the time I reached the asylum, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and a pale moon cast its light over the crumbling facade. The building loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette framed by a sky thick with clouds. Vines crawled up its brick walls like veins, and shattered windows gave it a skeletal appearance. I parked my car at the edge of the overgrown lot, my headlights briefly illuminating a rusted, "No trespassing" sign. Like that was going to stop me. The asylum's front doors were heavy and warped, hanging slightly ajar as if someone or something had forced them open long ago. I stepped inside, and the smell of mildew and decay hit me immediately. The air was thick and damp, carrying a faint metallic tang that reminded me of blood. The main lobby was vast, It's peeling paint and crumbling plaster, giving it an almost skeletal appearance. A massive reception desk sat at the center, covered in layers of dust and debris. Behind it, a staircase spiraled upward, its banister twisted and broken. I pulled out my flashlight and recorder, my voice steady as I began documenting. Blackwood Asylum, built in 1889, closed in 1952, known for reports of abuse, unethical experiments, and unexplained phenomena. Initial observations: the structure is deteriorated but intact. The atmosphere is oppressive, almost suffocating. As I moved deeper into the building, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in the air, and my footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness. The hallways stretched endlessly, lined with rusted gurneys, shattered light fixtures, and doors hanging off their hinges. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it crude, some of it disturbingly detailed, depicting twisted faces and shadowy figures. In one of the patient rooms, I found a small wooden box beneath a rusted bed frame. Inside was a collection of yellowed papers, brittle with age. Among them was a journal, its leather cover cracked and stained. I flipped through the pages, recognizing the neat handwriting as belonging to a nurse. The entries started innocently enough, describing daily routines and the challenges of caring for patients. But as I read further, the tone shifted. October 15, 1934. Dr. Harrington has become different. He speaks of breakthroughs, of pushing the boundaries of medicine. But the patients, they scream so much at night. I hear them in my dreams, crying for help. I try to tell myself it's for their own good, but something feels wrong. November 3, 1934. One of the orderlies quit today. He wouldn't say why, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He told me not to stay here after dark. I laughed it off, but now I wonder, what does he know that I don't? December 12, 1934. It's worse than I imagined. I saw the lab today, saw what they're doing to the patients. I can't write it down. I can't even think about it without feeling sick. I need to leave this place. God help me, I need to leave. The final entries were incoherent, written in shaky, desperate scrawls. The last one read, "They're watching me. I hear them in the walls. I think I'm next." I set the journal down, my hands trembling. The words felt heavy, oppressive, as if the anguish of their author had seeped into the pages. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My flashlight's beam darted around the room, but nothing moved. Still, the sensation persisted, crawling under my skin. As I made my way down another hallway, a sound froze me in my tracks. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on glass. I turned toward the source, my flashlight sweeping across the corridor. At the end of the hall, a figure stood in the shadows. It was humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture hunched and unnatural. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, with a jerking, unnatural motion, it began to approach. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The figure moved faster, its steps erratic but deliberate. I turned and ran, the sound of its pursuit echoing in the corridor. My heart pounded in my chest as I darted through the maze-like hallways, desperate to find an exit. Finally, I burst into what appeared to be a therapy room, slamming the door behind me. My back pressed against the wood as I struggled to catch my breath. The tapping started again, slow and deliberate, just outside the door. And then silence. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But the sense of being watched remained, an invisible weight pressing down on me. I knew I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. But something drew me deeper into the asylum, as if an unseen force was guiding me. I found myself in the basement, where the air was even colder and the stench of decay was nearly unbearable. At the end of a narrow corridor, I found a steel door slightly ajar. Inside was the lab. Rusted equipment, broken glass, and dark stains covered the room. In the center was a gurney, its leather restraints still intact. The sight made my stomach churn. On a nearby table, I found a photograph. It depicted a group of doctors, their faces stern and expressionless. But in the background, barely visible, was a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. Before I could process what I was seeing, the lights in the lab flickered. A low, guttural moan filled the air, rising to an ear-splitting shriek. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls warping and twisting. Shadows writhed and coalesced, forming shapes that clawed toward me. I ran. I don't remember how I found my way out. One moment I was in the basement. The next, I was stumbling into the cold night air. The asylum loomed behind me, dark and malevolent, as if daring me to return. I didn't look back as I sped away, the nurse's journal on the seat beside me. I didn't need to. The asylum's horrors were burned into my memory, and I knew I'd never forget the figure in the hallway, or the sense that it was still watching me. If Hollow Manor unsettled me and Blackwood Asylum terrified me, the next stop on my journey brought something worse. A creeping despair that clung to me like a second skin. Dry Creek, Arizona. A once thriving mining town, now little more than a memory etched into the dust. At its heart stood the crumbling remains of St. Harlow's Church, a structure locals avoided at all costs. The stories about Dry Creek were sparse but chilling. Miners in the 1880s had struck a vein of silver so rich it was called the Devil's Vein. Within weeks of its discovery, strange accidents plagued the mine. Cave-ins, unexplained explosions, miners disappearing without a trace. The church became a refuge for the grieving families, but over time, it transformed into something darker. Rumors of occult rituals, strange symbols carved into the pews, and a preacher who claimed he could speak to what lay beneath the earth circulated until the town's abrupt abandonment in 1910. Few dared to visit Dry Creek, let alone the church. But I wasn't like most people. I couldn't resist the pull of its grim history. The desert stretched endlessly around me as I drove toward the ghost town, the midday sun baking the earth into cracked, brittle sheets. The road turned from asphalt to dirt, then to little more than a faint trail winding through cacti and sagebrush. Dry Creek emerged on the horizon as a cluster of sun-bleached buildings sagging under the weight of time. I parked my car on the edge of town, stepping into the oppressive stillness. The wind carried a faint metallic tang, reminiscent of old blood. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of my boots on the gravel, the rustling of dried weeds. It felt as though the town was holding its breath, waiting for something. St. Harlow's Church stood at the far end of the main street, its steeple crooked and leaning precariously. The wooden doors hung loosely on their hinges, swinging gently in the breeze. Above them, the words Deus non dormiat, God does not sleep, were carved into the lintel. The irony wasn't lost on me. I approached cautiously, my footsteps echoing on the warped wooden steps. The doors groaned as I pushed them open, revealing the church's dim, cavernous interior. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a profound, suffocating quiet that seemed to swallow even my breathing. Dust motes hung in the air, illuminated by beams of light streaming through the broken stained glass windows. The pews were in disarray, some overturned, others riddled with scratches that looked almost deliberate. Strange symbols were etched into the wood, crude yet intricate, their meanings lost to time. At the front of the church stood the altar, draped in a rotted cloth. Behind it, a massive wooden cross hung lopsided on the wall, its surface blackened as if scorched by fire. I pulled out my recorder and began documenting. St. Harlow's Church, Dry Creek, built in 1884. Abandoned in 1910 after the collapse of the town. Reports of occult activity and unexplained phenomena. Initial observations. The interior shows signs of vandalism, but the atmosphere is oppressive, almost hostile. As I moved toward the altar, my flashlight caught something etched into the floorboards. Kneeling, I brushed away the dirt and dust, revealing a circular pattern carved into the wood. It was a sigil, jagged and unnatural, with symbols I didn't recognize radiating from its center. The moment my fingers traced its outline, a chill shot through me, so intense it felt like ice in my veins. I jerked my hand back, and the air around me seemed to shift. The light streaming through the windows dimmed, and a low hum filled the space, almost imperceptible at first but growing louder by the second. I stood, my heart pounding, and turned toward the entrance. The doors I had left open were now closed. Desperate to steady my nerves, I focused on the pulpit to the left of the altar. On it lay a leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked and brittle. I opened it carefully, revealing rows of names written in spidery script. Members of the congregation, perhaps. But as I flipped through the pages, the entries changed. The names became shorter, as though hastily scrawled, accompanied by dates that grew closer and closer together. Then came the final pages, where the entries devolved into jagged lines and nonsensical scribbles. Among them, a phrase appeared repeatedly. It watches. It waits. I stepped back, and my boot hit something solid. Turning, I found an old mining helmet lying on the floor, its lamp broken but still intact. Beside it, a pickaxe leaned against the wall, its wooden handle splintered. Suddenly, the hum in the air intensified, transforming into a guttural growl that reverberated through the church. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. Then came the voices, faint at first, but growing louder, overlapping in a cacophony of anguish. Words I couldn't understand spilled from unseen mouths, their tone pleading, desperate. I froze, unable to move, as shadows began to creep along the walls. They twisted and writhed, forming shapes that resembled figures. Miners, their faces hollow and sunken, their eyes voids of darkness. One by one, they turned toward me, the black shadow. I stumbled backward, tripping over the pews as the figures advanced. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Behind them, a darker shadow emerged, massive and formless, its presence so overwhelming it seemed to consume the air itself. The growl deepened, vibrating in my chest. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass following me. The shadows lunged, their hands clawing at the air, but I didn't look back. Reaching the doors, I shoved them open and burst into the sunlight. The oppressive weight lifted immediately, replaced by the searing heat of the desert. I stumbled down the steps, gasping for air, and turned to see the church standing silent and still. But in the highest window of the steeple, I saw it, the black shadow watching me. I didn't linger in Dry Creek. The drive out of town was a blur, my thoughts racing as I tried to process what I had seen. The ledger and the sigil haunted me, their meanings eluding me but their implications clear. Something was in that church, something old, something hungry. By the time I reached the main highway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert. For the first time, I questioned whether this journey was worth it. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop. The stories of these places had taken root in my mind, and I couldn't walk away, not yet. If Dry Creek and St. Harlow's Church carried the weight of despair, my next destination brought something different, a chilling intimacy that wrapped around me like cold, wet hands. Nestled on the edge of a sprawling, glassy lake in rural Michigan was the Ashmere Lake House, a place both beautiful and foreboding. On the surface, the lake house was picturesque, the kind of place one might associate with fond memories of summers past. But beneath its surface lay a sinister legend. Decades ago, a string of drownings had plagued the area, seemingly unrelated victims, all pulled under the water near the dock of the Ashmere Lake House. No bodies were ever recovered, and rumors swirled about a pale woman seen walking the shoreline on moonlit nights, singing a mournful lullaby. Unlike the abandoned places I'd visited before, the lake house wasn't completely forgotten. Its most recent owners, the Holcomb family, fled in the 1990s after claiming to see the woman in the lake. They left behind everything: furniture, belongings, even the family dog, which was later found wandering the nearby woods. The house had sat empty ever since. As I drove toward the lake house, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the narrow road. The water came into view first, still and dark, its surface reflecting the overcast sky. The house sat at the edge of the lake, its whitewashed exterior faded and peeling, the dock jutting out into the water like a skeletal finger. The lake was unnervingly calm, its waters almost unnaturally smooth. As I stepped out of my car, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and moss, and the faint sound of water lapping against the shore reached my ears. The trees surrounding the property swayed gently, their branches creaking like old bones. The lake house itself was eerily preserved, as though the Holcombs had left only yesterday. Toys littered the yard, now sun-bleached and cracked. A swing set stood rusted and lopsided, its chains rattling softly in the wind. The front door, slightly ajar, seemed to beckon me inside. I hesitated. Unlike the other locations, this one felt alive, as though it had been waiting for me. The interior of the house was a snapshot of 1990s domestic life, frozen in time. A faded floral couch sat facing a boxy television, the kind with a built-in VHS player. The dining table was set with plates and glasses, now covered in a thin layer of dust. Family photos lined the walls, their subjects smiling blissfully, unaware of what was to come. As I moved through the house, the atmosphere grew heavier. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, and the faint sound of dripping water reached my ears, though I couldn't pinpoint its source. In the kitchen, I found an open cookbook, its pages warped from moisture. On the counter sat a glass pitcher filled with murky water, long forgotten. But it was in the living room that I found the first real clue. An old photo album lay open on the coffee table, its pages curling with age. The pictures inside depicted the Holcomb family, parents, 2 children, and a golden retriever, posing happily by the lake. But as I flipped through the album, the tone shifted. Later photos showed the lake shrouded in fog, the family's smiles strained. In one image, the mother stood on the dock, staring into the water, her face partially obscured by her hair. Behind her, in the misty water, was the faint outline of a woman. My chest tightened as I stared at the photo. I could almost hear the water sloshing, feel the cold air brushing against my neck. Then, from somewhere upstairs, came the sound of footsteps. I froze, straining to hear. The steps were slow and deliberate, creaking across the floor above me. My flashlight wavered as I made my way to the staircase, each step feeling like a test of my resolve. The upstairs hallway was narrow, lined with closed doors. One door at the far end was open just a crack, revealing darkness beyond. The sound of footsteps stopped as I approached the open door. My breath came in shallow bursts, the air around me growing colder. I nudged the door open with my foot, revealing a small bedroom. The room was sparsely furnished. A bed, a dresser, and a single chair by the window. On the dresser sat an old Polaroid camera, its strap frayed and its body coated in dust. Beside it was a stack of photographs. I picked one up, my stomach twisting as I studied it. It was a picture of the lake, taken from the dock. In the corner of the frame was a figure, a woman, her back to the camera, standing waist-deep in the water. Her hair floated around her like tendrils, her posture rigid. The other photos in the stack were variations of the same image, the woman in the water growing closer with each frame. The final photo made my blood run cold. It showed the dock at night, empty save for a shadowy figure standing at the edge. Beneath it was scrawled a single word: "Come." The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I heard it, soft singing, faint and mournful, coming from the lake. The voice was melodic but filled with sorrow, the words indistinct but haunting. My hands trembled as I stepped to the window, peering out at the dock. A woman stood at the water's edge, her long, dark hair cascading down her back. She was barefoot, her white dress clinging to her frame. Though I couldn't see her face, I felt her gaze pierce through me. The singing stopped abruptly, and she turned slowly toward the house. I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. A sudden, rhythmic pounding filled the air, shaking the walls. It seemed to come from beneath the house, a deep, resonant sound like something heavy striking the floorboards. Driven by equal parts terror and curiosity, I descended to the basement. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the smell of damp earth grew stronger with each step. The basement was dark and cluttered, but in the far corner, I saw something odd. A trapdoor partially hidden beneath an old rug. I pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading further down. The pounding grew louder, accompanied by the faint sound of rushing water. I descended into what appeared to be a hidden room, its walls lined with shelves cluttered with strange artifacts, bones, stones, and jars filled with unidentifiable substances. At the center of the room was a small altar, covered in water-stained photographs and candles long since extinguished. Among the photos were images of the pale woman always near the water, always watching. Suddenly, the water from the lake began to seep through the floor, pooling around my boots. The singing returned, louder now, echoing in the confined space. A chill ran through me as the water rose, bringing with it the unmistakable feeling of hands grasping at my legs. I fled the room, slipping and stumbling as I climbed the stairs. The singing followed me, growing louder, more insistent. By the time I reached the main floor, the water had risen to my ankles, its icy grip numbing my skin. I burst through the front door and into the night, the lake reflecting the moonlight like liquid silver. The woman was gone, but the singing persisted, echoing across the water. I ran to my car, my heart pounding, and didn't stop until I was miles away. The photographs I'd taken from the house sat on the passenger seat as I drove. Their images burned into my mind. The woman in the water, the hidden room, the altar, each piece of the puzzle hinted at something dark and ancient, something tied to the lake itself. Whatever haunted Ashmere Lake House wasn't just a ghost. It was something far older and far worse. As I sped down the empty highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped. The woman's song still echoed in my ears, and the weight of her gaze lingered like a phantom touch. The stories surrounding the Carnival of Shadows were some of the strangest I'd ever encountered. Unlike the haunted mansion, asylum, or lake house, the carnival didn't have a fixed location. It appeared and disappeared without warning, leaving behind only whispers and rumors of its ghostly attractions and the misfortunes of those who dared to visit. The carnival had last been reported in the 1980s, set up just outside a small town in Illinois. According to local lore, it was abandoned overnight, its staff and performers vanishing into thin air. The grounds were left in disarray, with rusting rides and crumbling tents standing as silent reminders of what once was. Some said the carnival was cursed, others claimed it was a doorway to another realm. Now, decades later, I had finally tracked down its resting place, hidden deep within a forest near the outskirts of the same town. The road was unmarked and overgrown, and as I made my way toward the site, the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees forming a twisted canopy that blocked out the sky. I'd dealt with haunted places before, but something about the Carnival of Shadows filled me with a deeper dread. Perhaps it was the idea that a place so transient, so untethered to time and space, could hold on to something far worse than restless spirits. The forest opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was, the remains of the carnival. The sight was surreal, like stepping into another world. Rusted Ferris wheel cars hung precariously from their spokes, swaying gently in the breeze. The carousel stood silent and still, its chipped horses frozen mid-leap. A row of game booths, their striped awnings tattered and sagging, lined one side of the clearing. The air was thick and stagnant, carrying the faint scent of popcorn and something far more unpleasant: decay. My flashlight cut through the gloom as I stepped forward, my boots crunching on the dirt. I tried to focus on my surroundings, but the oppressive silence made it difficult to think. Even the forest, so alive just moments ago, seemed to have fallen deathly still. At the center of the carnival stood the big top, its once bright red and white stripes now faded to dull shades of gray. The entrance was wide open, its flaps fluttering slightly despite the lack of wind. My pulse quickened as I approached, the sense of being watched growing stronger with each step. The interior of the big top was massive, its vaulted ceiling stretching high above me. Rows of wooden benches surrounded a circular stage, the dirt floor littered with debris. An old spotlight, its glass shattered, hung precariously from the rafters. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter and applause, though the space was empty and lifeless. I pulled out my recorder, my voice barely steady. Carnival of Shadows. Abandoned for decades, yet the structure remains intact. Initial observations. The atmosphere is oppressive, almost suffocating. There's a sense of something lingering here. As I scanned the room with my flashlight, my beam landed on a cluster of mannequins seated in the audience. Their blank faces stared forward, their bodies posed unnaturally, some leaning awkwardly against each other. At first, I thought they were props left behind, but as I drew closer, I noticed something strange. The mannequins were dressed in vintage clothing, their fabrics faded but intact. Their faces were painted in grotesque expressions, wide grins, gaping mouths, hollow eyes. One mannequin, positioned in the front row, was different. Its face wasn't painted. It was carved, jagged and crude, with features that seemed to twist as I looked at them. Its hands were clasped tightly around a small box, and its head tilted slightly in my direction, as if it were aware of my presence. I reached for the box, but the moment my fingers brushed its surface, a faint sound filled the air. Laughter. Soft at first, then louder, echoing through the tent. I whipped around, my flashlight darting over the empty benches, but there was no one there. Shaken, I left the big top and headed toward the game booths, desperate for answers or an exit. The laughter still echoed faintly, carried on the wind, but the booths were silent and still. Each one was filled with remnants of its past. Cracked plates at a ring toss game, faded stuffed animals slumped against the walls, a row of glass bottles coated in grime. One booth caught my eye. Its painted sign read "The Lucky Draw," though the letters were chipped and barely legible. On the counter sat a wooden box filled with tickets, each one stamped with the word "Winner." Behind the counter was a wheel of fortune, its surface cracked but still legible. The sections of the wheel bore strange symbols, none of which I recognized. I reached for one of the tickets, but as I did, the wheel began to spin on its own. The air around me grew cold, and the laughter returned, louder and more manic. The wheel slowed, its pointer landing on a symbol that resembled an eye. Suddenly, the lights in the carnival flickered to life. The carousel began to turn, its music warped and discordant. The Ferris wheel groaned as it creaked into motion, and from the shadows, figures began to emerge. The ringmaster and the children. They came slowly at first, their movements jerky and unnatural. Children, or at least what appeared to be children, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Their faces were pale and expressionless, their eyes wide and unblinking. They surrounded me, their heads tilting in unison as they studied me. Then came the ringmaster. He stepped out of the big top, tall and skeletal, his black coat trailing behind him. His face was painted like a clown's, but his features were sharp and menacing. A top hat perched atop his head, and his gloved hands held a crooked cane. "Welcome," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "You've come to play, haven't you?" I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering as the children closed in around me. The ringmaster's grin widened, revealing teeth that were far too sharp. "You've taken the ticket," he continued, gesturing to the lucky draw booth. "And now the game begins." The world spun around me as the carnival came alive. The rides moved faster, their once joyful melodies now twisted into a nightmarish cacophony. The children began to chant, their voices blending into an incomprehensible hum. The ringmaster raised his cane, and the ground beneath me shifted. I found myself on the carousel, its painted horses snapping their heads toward me, their mouths opening in silent screams. The children's laughter echoed all around, growing louder and more dissonant. Desperate, I leapt from the carousel and ran toward the edge of the clearing. The forest loomed ahead, but the path was gone, replaced by an endless sea of trees. The ringmaster's voice boomed behind me. "You cannot leave until the game is done." I turned to see him standing in the center of the carnival, his arms outstretched. The children surrounded him, their faces now twisted into ghastly parodies of human expressions. They rushed toward me, their movements inhumanly fast. With no other option, I fled into the forest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The laughter and chanting followed me, growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching for me like claws. At last, I stumbled onto the road and collapsed against my car. The carnival was gone, the clearing empty save for the faint scent of popcorn lingering in the air. As I sped away, the ringmaster's voice echoed in my mind. The game is never truly over. I've always believed the places I explored were haunted, not me. The stories I chased were tied to their locations, their horrors confined within crumbling walls and cursed grounds. But now, as I sit in my small apartment, replaying the events of the Carnival of Shadows over and over in my mind, I realize how wrong I was. Something followed me home. At first, it was subtle. Objects in my apartment moved slightly from where I left them. A mug rotated an inch on the counter, a picture frame tilted on the wall. I told myself it was my imagination, or maybe exhaustion after weeks of exploring such malevolent places. But then the dreams began. In my sleep, I would see them. The pale woman from the lake, the shadowy figure from the asylum, the monstrous ringmaster with his skeletal grin. They stood at the foot of my bed, watching silently as I tried to scream but couldn't. Each night they came closer. Then came the sounds. At first, it was faint whispers, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to drift from the corners of the room. Then the laughter started, the same haunting laughter I'd heard in the carnival. It would echo through my apartment at all hours, sometimes soft, sometimes booming, always sending a chill down my spine. I wasn't just living with ghosts, I was their prisoner. One night, the activity escalated. I was working at my desk, trying to distract myself by transcribing my notes from the lake house, when the lights flickered. My heart leapt as I turned toward the overhead lamp, its soft hum growing louder as it flickered again. Then the bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard a sound I'll never forget, a low, guttural growl, coming from just behind me. Slowly, I turned my head. There, in the reflection of my computer screen, was the figure from the asylum. Its hollow eyes bore into mine, its gaping mouth twitching as though it were trying to speak. My chest tightened as I spun around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the screen, the reflection was gone. But the growl persisted, growing louder, until I felt it vibrating in my skull. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair, and bolted from the room. I contacted a friend of mine, a paranormal investigator named Elise, who had helped me on a previous case. I told her everything, the haunted places, the journal from the asylum, the photographs from the lake house, the carnival's sinister ringmaster. She listened intently, her tone grim when she finally spoke. "Aaron, you've done something dangerous. You didn't just visit these places, you took pieces of them with you. The artifacts, the photographs, even the memories you recorded. They're anchors. You've tied yourself to these spirits. What do I do?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. "How do I stop this?" Elise hesitated. "You have to let them go. Destroy the artifacts. Burn them, bury them, whatever it takes to sever the connection. But it won't be easy. They won't let you go without a fight." Determined to reclaim my life, I gathered everything I had brought back from my investigations. The asylum's journal, the lake house photographs, the ticket from the carnival, even the amulet from my grandmother. I piled them in the center of my living room and doused them with lighter fluid. As I struck the match, the room grew cold. The shadows along the walls deepened, stretching and twisting into unnatural shapes. The match flickered in my hand, and for a moment, I thought it would extinguish. But then I dropped it onto the pile. The flames roared to life, illuminating the room with a harsh, flickering light. The objects crackled and hissed as they burned, releasing a foul-smelling smoke. But as the fire grew, so did the activity around me. The whispers became shouts, the laughter deafening. The apartment shook violently, picture frames crashing to the floor and furniture toppling over. Figures began to materialize in the smoke. Pale faces, shadowy forms, monstrous shapes. They circled me, their voices overlapping in a chaotic cacophony. "Why?" they screamed. "Why did you come? Why did you take us?" I stood frozen, clutching the amulet around my neck. "I didn't mean to," I whispered. "I didn't know." The ringmaster's voice rose above the others, booming and authoritative. "You cannot escape. The game is not over." The room seemed to collapse inward, the walls warping as the spirits closed in. The flames in the center of the room turned black, casting long, writhing shadows. I dropped to my knees, clutching the amulet tightly, and screamed. "Leave me alone," I shouted. "Go back to where you came from. You don't belong here." The spirits paused, their forms flickering. The ringmaster stepped forward, his skeletal grin widening. "You are ours now," he said. "You brought us here, and now you will stay with us, forever." Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed a handful of salt from the kitchen counter, a trick Elise had taught me, and threw it into the fire. The flames erupted in a brilliant white light, and the spirits shrieked, their forms dissolving into the smoke. The apartment shook one final time before falling silent. When I woke the next morning, the apartment was eerily still. The pile of artifacts was nothing more than ash, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. I felt lighter, as though a great weight had been removed from my shoulders. But I knew better than to believe it was truly over. I packed my things and left the apartment that day, unable to bear the thought of staying there any longer. I moved to a new city, started fresh, and swore off investigating haunted places. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of laughter, distant but unmistakable. And in the darkest corners of my dreams, the ringmaster waits. Months later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, the dock at Ashmere Lake. Standing at the edge was the pale woman, her eyes fixed on the camera. Beneath the image was scrawled a single word, "Soon."